There are places in the world where time bends, where hours feel like days or moments stretch long enough to leave scars. But even in those anomalies, time still exists, still ticks, still leaves behind footprints in your memory. This temple is not one of those places. In the temple, time does not stretch or slow. It ceases entirely. The earliest stories were scattered fragments, scratched into margins of ancient journals, mentioned in passing by monks who spoke of a place where silence feels heavier than stone. These travelers, many of whom never returned, claim to have stumbled across a structure that didn't match any known architecture. No inscriptions, no markings of worship, no signs of decay. It was as if the temple had not aged, because aging required time. Those who did return could never agree on where it was. Some insisted it was buried in the valleys beyond Ladakh. Others swore it was hidden within a Central Asian ruin, only visible during sandstorms. But no matter the location, the experience was always the same. You step through the archway, and something stops. Not just your watch, not just your breath, something deeper. Something within the fabric of your existence loses its anchor. Inside, time does not flow forward. It doesn't flow backward. It simply waits. Clocks stall with their hands caught mid-tick. Mechanical devices fail. The rhythm of your body, the subtle, unconscious awareness of seconds passing, fades into silence. It's not frightening at first. In fact, many describe it as peaceful, weightless, like finally taking off a burden you didn't know you were carrying. One account, found in a weathered notebook abandoned on the steps of a Bhutanese monastery, tells of a woman who entered the temple carrying grief too heavy to bear. Her child had died, her family had left her, and she no longer felt tethered to anything in the outside world. She wrote that, inside the temple, the pain dulled, not from healing, but because time had stopped pressing against the wound. She could breathe without the ache of yesterday or the fear of tomorrow. But not all who entered were seeking peace. Some were explorers, others were soldiers. One man, a French mercenary in the 1800s, entered the temple while fleeing across the desert. He described seeing his own reflection on the stone floor, watching himself from above, disconnected from the act of fleeing. His journal stops mid-sentence. The next page is blank. When it resumes, the handwriting is different, and the language has shifted. No one knows who wrote the rest. There are whispers that the temple only appears to those whose lives have collapsed inward, people who have run out of time in every other sense, and for them, the stillness is not just relief, it's an invitation. They walk in, not to escape death, but to be removed from the sequence of living altogether. The temple doesn't take you. It offers a space where nothing continues unless you decide it should. And that's the danger. Because once time stops, so does your need to leave. Visitors who linger too long lose not just their memory of time passing, but the desire to measure it at all. They forget how long they've been inside. Then they forget they ever came in. Then they forget there was a world outside the walls. So what is this place really? Is it a wound in the timeline of the world? A mercy carved into stone? A trap for those who no longer want to be chased by clocks? That is the mystery we walk into tonight. Welcome to Tales from the Forbidden Library, where not all stories unfold through time. Some begin where time ends. Long before the temple became an object of mystery, it was regarded as a test, not of faith or strength, but of presence. The earliest recorded visit dates back over 1,000 years, etched into the stone walls of a ruined watchtower in Samarkand, where a monk's final words were carved with remarkable precision. He claimed he had stepped outside the hourglass and seen a place where God no longer breathes. The carving ended abruptly, as if the chisel was dropped mid-stroke. It was not unusual in those days for travelers to vanish. Bandits, harsh terrain, starvation. All were expected risks. But when entire caravans disappeared without a trace, and only their camels returned with glassy eyes and dried footprints, something deeper took root in the legends. These weren't accidents. These were crossings, moments where the land itself had thinned, and those who stepped wrong passed into something paused. A group of 7 pilgrims once set out from Shiraz after hearing of a place where suffering could not follow. According to oral tradition, they were devout mystics, scholars of divine silence who had fasted for 40 days and received visions of a temple where time wept but did not move. They believed it to be a holy wound, a fragment of paradise torn from chronology. And they went searching, not to pray, but to be unmade. Only one of them returned. He was found naked, wandering near the Caspian Sea, eyes bloodshot and hands shaking. He spoke a language no one could recognize, one filled with rhythms that resembled chanting but followed no known grammar. When he finally broke into coherent words, he said only this. The others stayed. They wanted to remember nothing. I still remembered the stars, so it pushed me out. His skin bore no signs of trauma, but the calluses on his feet had softened, as if he hadn't walked in weeks. Medical records noted his pulse was faint, his body temperature slightly lower than normal, and his circadian rhythm completely non-functional. Doctors reported that he did not blink unless reminded. He died 3 days later, his heart simply stopping in his sleep. Not from illness, not from age, just stopping, as if it had reached the end of something only he could perceive. No one claimed his body, but the symbols carved into the soles of his feet were photographed and later identified by a linguist who believed them to be an extinct dialect of an ancient Himalayan tribe, one that had no concept of tomorrow. More tales followed, always whispered, never published. Herders in the highlands claimed they once watched a structure appear during a storm, a dome-shaped building that wasn't there the day before, surrounded by absolute stillness. Birds didn't fly near it. Wolves refused to approach. And when 2 young men tried to enter, only one returned. He never spoke again, but was often seen writing in a journal he would burn page by page every night before sleep. A British survey team in the 19th century reportedly encountered what they called a symmetrical impossibility. They claimed to have found a building with no shadows, despite the sun being high in the sky. When they tried to measure it, their instruments failed, compasses spun without reason, and watches ticked backward. Their leader, Lieutenant Harrow, wrote in his log, "This place does not obey. It refuses time." That logbook was later found with his skeleton, some 90 miles from their last recorded position, clutching a timepiece that had cracked precisely at 3:33. All other members of the expedition were never found. What's most disturbing is that these accounts are spaced decades, sometimes centuries apart. But the descriptions remain consistent. The architecture, the stillness, the absence of decay. And always, always, the same warning whispered by those few who escape. You will not die inside, but you may forget that dying is something you were meant to do. The idea that the temple is alive in some way has taken root among occult scholars. They say it feeds on stagnation, not blood, not fear, inertia. That the longer you stay inside, the more the temple becomes you, and you become less urgent, less real, until you are only a presence sitting within stillness, perfectly content to never move again. Perhaps that is why the first pilgrims never returned. Not because they were lost, but because they finally found what they didn't know they were looking for. A place where nothing hurts, because nothing moves. And if that sounds like peace to you, you might be closer to the temple than you realize. The stories of the temple's strange stillness were unsettling enough. But it wasn't until the physical evidence began surfacing that historians and mystics alike started whispering about a more disturbing truth. Inside those walls, the body ceases to obey even its most basic functions. Time does not just pause mentally, it stops biologically. And the result is horrifying in its calmness. One of the clearest accounts came from a French medic stationed in Afghanistan during the 1980s. During a routine patrol, his unit encountered a collapsed shepherd near a ravine. The man was silent, dehydrated, and bore a deep gash on his thigh. But there was no blood, no scabbing, no sign of healing or infection. It was as if the wound had been opened only moments ago, yet the flesh looked days, if not weeks, old. He was eventually stabilized, but the bleeding never started, nor did it stop. It simply never began. The medic later wrote that he had never encountered a human being so utterly disconnected from his own biology. It was as though his body existed in stillness, outside the laws of decay. He should have died, but nothing in him was moving toward death, or away from it. Other reports followed. A group of travelers exploring an unmarked temple near the Indus River claimed that after stepping inside, one woman pricked her finger on a rusted lantern. No blood emerged, the skin parted, the nerves reacted, but nothing flowed. She felt no pain. Overwhelmed by the silence of the place, she stepped back outside. Within seconds, her finger began to bleed, as if time had rushed to catch up with her. Scholars now believe that in the temple, entropy itself is suspended. The body doesn't age, wounds do not clot, cells do not divide. You are not dying, but you are not living either. You are paused, a living, still life caught in a frame with no progression. A disturbing consequence of this stillness is how memory behaves inside the temple. Victims who managed to escape often reported losing not just a sense of how long they were inside, but the feeling that time ever existed. One man claimed he no longer understood what before and after meant. Another could not remember the sensation of hunger or the meaning of sleep. For some, the experience was not frightening. It was addicting. The absence of suffering, of decay, of urgency was mistaken for peace. And so they returned, again and again, until one day they stopped returning at all. There are rumors of monks who willingly live inside the temple in constant meditation, their bodies preserved, their minds suspended in a kind of frozen enlightenment. Some claim that if you were to enter and call their names, they would open their eyes, but their pupils would not dilate. They would see you, but they would not move, because movement implies time, and time, for them, is gone. In one documented case from the early 1900s, a Russian explorer stumbled into the temple with a broken ankle. He later recounted crawling for what felt like hours before realizing his pain had dulled and then vanished entirely. He looked at his leg and found it bent unnaturally, but it hadn't swollen, it hadn't bruised, it simply existed, twisted, still, as if the injury had occurred in a vacuum where healing and hurting no longer applied. He remained inside for what he described as a few minutes. When he left, it was night. His team was gone, his supplies buried under sand. Later, after being rescued, doctors were baffled. His injury was days old, yet the tissues showed no signs of deterioration. It was as if his body had pressed pause on suffering itself. But not all wounds were physical. Several survivors spoke of a strange emotional erosion, like their sense of guilt, love, or grief had thinned inside the temple. Feelings they had carried for years suddenly felt unimportant, not resolved, just suspended. And when they returned to the world, those feelings came back with a vengeance, crashing into them like memories that had grown heavier while they were away. One woman said it best: "The temple didn't heal me, it hid me from myself, from my past, from time. But what hides eventually returns." It is now speculated by certain occult researchers that the temple is not a building at all, but a tear in continuity, a place where cause and effect are severed. You can be cut, but you will not bleed. You can remember, but you will not care. And eventually, you may forget what it means to want anything at all. That is perhaps the most dangerous wound of all, not the ones that fail to bleed, but the ones that convince you bleeding was never necessary. Because when nothing hurts, nothing heals either. And when time refuses to pass, you don't become eternal. You become forgotten. The strangest part of the temple is not what happens inside. It's what doesn't follow you out. Most of the accounts that survive come from those who were somehow forced to leave, dragged out by companions, pulled back by emergencies, or ejected by the temple itself. And while their memories of entering are often vivid, the exit is almost always a blur. Some remember stepping back through the archway and collapsing into time like it was a crashing wave. Others don't remember leaving at all, just waking up somewhere else, changed, as if the temple decided their visit was over. But what unites them is this: none of them can recall why they left. They all say the same thing. I didn't want to leave, but I also don't remember wanting to stay. It's as though the temple doesn't let you form desire. It doesn't hold you. It just dulls the part of you that needs anything beyond stillness. The part of you that craves, hungers, aches for movement. That part is silenced. And once silenced, it forgets how to speak. There was a man who journaled his visit, noting everything he saw, heard, and thought the moment he entered. He wrote page after page inside the temple, carefully marking his experiences. But the final entry is unnerving. It simply says, "The pen doesn't move anymore. Or maybe I don't. I can't tell the difference." The next page is blank. The journal was later found clutched in his hand in a hospital in Delhi. He had no memory of how he got there. Researchers have tried to map the phenomenon, attempting to locate patterns in where the temple appears, but it resists documentation. GPS systems fail. Coordinates don't align. A drone sent into the suspected area once returned with 3 hours of blank footage, followed by a single frame of an interior hall, completely symmetrical and untouched by dust. But when the team returned to the same site, it was a field of dry stone. The temple had vanished. Many believe the temple doesn't exist in space as we know it. It may be a fold, a crease in the structure of reality that opens only to those in the right psychological state, those on the edge of collapse, of surrender. You don't find the temple. You stop moving, and the temple finds you. And once it does, it starts taking things in subtle ways. Not possessions, not years, but moments. Specific ones. One woman said she left the temple and realized she could no longer remember the face of her father. Another forgot the taste of her favorite meal, small, personal fragments, erased like annotations in the margins of memory. It doesn't steal who you are, just the things that make you care. That's why no one remembers leaving. Because leaving implies urgency, a desire to be elsewhere. But inside the temple, all destinations fade. You don't leave because you want to go. You leave because something else decides you don't belong anymore. The temple doesn't trap you. It seduces you with stillness. It whispers that everything you've ever chased is just movement for movement's sake. That suffering only exists because you move through time. That fear and loss and ambition all come from clocks. And for a terrifying moment, it almost makes sense. That's the danger. Not that you'll die inside, but that you'll agree with it. That you'll look into the still air, feel nothing move inside you, and finally say, yes, this is better. The people who don't return, they're not dead, they're not trapped, they're just no longer reaching for anything. Their stories stop not because they end, but because they don't need to continue. And those who do return, who manage to pull themselves back, they carry a vacancy behind their eyes, a stillness that never quite fades, like part of them stayed inside, like time forgot to come all the way back with them. Because maybe, once you've left the temple, the world isn't real in the same way anymore. Maybe time only resumes around you, not within you. What makes the temple so terrifying isn't its silence, or the stillness of the air, or even the way it unravels biology. It's the way it reveals something none of us are prepared to face. That without the pressure of time, most of us would stop moving. Not because we are at peace, but because we are afraid to choose. Outside the temple, life demands motion, decisions, sacrifice. We feel every second press into our skin like a reminder. Do something, become something, before the clock runs out. But inside, that clock is gone. And what's left is what we really are when no one's watching. When there's nothing to chase, nothing to fix, nothing to prove. In that kind of stillness, we are no longer measured by progress. We are revealed by presence. And for some, that presence is unbearable. For others, it's the only honest thing they've ever known. The danger of the temple isn't just that it removes time, it's that it removes urgency. And with urgency gone, so goes meaning. Pain fades, but so does purpose. Grief disappears, but so does love. You begin to see time not as a cruel tyrant, but as the architect of everything you've ever cared about. Without it, you're not free. You're empty. And maybe that's why the temple doesn't need walls, why it's never in the same place. Maybe it's not even real in the way buildings are real. Maybe it's a metaphor the world uses to test those who are closest to vanishing from themselves. If you've ever felt like hours pass and nothing changes. If you've ever stared at a clock and wondered whether you're moving or simply being carried forward by something invisible. If you've ever felt like you're stuck in a life that's already paused, then you've already stood at the edge of this temple. Because time doesn't stop in one place. It starts to stop inside you. And maybe, just maybe, the temple isn't waiting to be found. It's waiting to be remembered.